From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead for you today, an extended conversation with longtime agricultural economist David Kohl of Virginia Tech University about the potential lasting impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the U.S. agricultural economy. He'll talk about how this situation has uncovered issues in the food supply chain that he says will have to be addressed, and what he calls the pillars of economic recovery for producers and the agriculture industry as a whole. Dave will be addressing this topic in greater detail on a free webinar next Wednesday, sponsored by K-State. Also today, this week's K-State horticulture segment, Gregg Eyestone will discuss garden potato and onion harvest and storage techniques. All on this Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, our Thursday edition, and thanks for being along with us. Well, looking ahead to next Wednesday evening, the 17th of June, the Women Managing the Farm program, which is based here at Kansas State University, will be hosting a free webinar, and its aim is to discuss the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic on the agricultural economies here in the United States and globally. And leading that discussion will be our guest now. He is a professor emeritus of agricultural economics at a Virginia Tech University with a 5-decade career in that capacity. Dr. David Kohl has joined us to, in a moment, get into the topic he'll be covering by title, Transforming the Black Swan into a Phoenix. We'll decipher what that means in just a moment, Dave. But thank you for joining us. And how would you sum up these ill effects of the COVID-19 situation on the agricultural economy?
Well, I think one of the things, and it's a pleasure to us be with you, and at K-State, you folks do a lot of great work, and I look forward to the webcast next week. But, sizing up this event, it impacted all aspects of the agriculture, the economy. Initially, of course, it started out, with corn, because what happened was the ethanol industry basically was challenged because we had demand destruction, of course, in fuel, and that compounded with Russia and OPEC kind of ganging up on our fuel industry here in the United States. It created initial problems there. And then, of course, we had the issues pertaining to demand destruction in cotton, but then over in the protein sector, of course, with 70% of the U.S. economy driven by the service-based industries, ranging from airlines to hotels to, of course, we got the universities, et cetera, and school systems. It basically created demand destruction there. And I think the demand destruction was the major impact out of this event. And, of course, it hit all industries being involved in agriculture.
So you really can say fairly that no segment or sector of agriculture was spared from some sort of detrimental impact here.
Exactly. And, of course, personally myself, we're in the milk business. We have a dairy creamery, and initially we saw the run-up in orders, and then, of course, we saw the demand destruction. And then, of course, with our business, we have glass bottles. We couldn't get the return on the bottles because the stores wouldn't allow them back. And so it hit all parts of our industry.
As was stated earlier, your career has canvassed 5 decades of agricultural economic events and developments. Can you liken this situation to anything that's occurred previously? Naturally, folks think back to the 1980s, but are there comparisons that you can make here?
It's real interesting. I actually couldn't sleep last night, and so I was up reading at about 2 to 3 this morning, reading the Economist magazine, Wall Street Journal, and they actually had some articles about this, and, the answer is no. We've never seen a situation like this. A lot of people like to parallel or, compare this to the 1980s. And no, it was the suddenness, and it was how it impacted everyone around the globe. In other words, this was more of a health issue, whereas you look at other recessions or you look at the Great Depression, oftentimes these were financially related, a run-up in interest rates like the 1980s. Or, in the Great Depression, of course, we went from globalization to deglobalization. This one was a health issue, and it hit all aspects, and it was demand destruction. And, you had some parts of the economy are going back to 0 to 25% demand, like the airlines or the hotels. Of course, your universities shut down. And so, again, this one, we have not seen anything like this before. And I haven't my 5 decades. And again, I tend to like my history, and going back, there's no, parallel events like this.
Given the uniqueness of this, then, several questions.
Yeah.
What have we learned about the agricultural industry, its structure, and its ability to navigate such an event, the strengths and weaknesses, if you will?
Yeah, and this is me speaking, and again, I tend to be very, very candid. One of the things this taught us was that we have too much concentration in our supply chains and our marketing chains. And, of course, we've seen that, play out in the protein sector, whether it's been beef, pork, right on down through. The whole balance between optimization and efficiency and concentration versus diversification and resiliency. This taught us a lesson that, let's put it this way, it's not bad to have a diversified type of strategy. And so supply chains is definitely one of the things we really hit the wall there in agriculture, but also we hit it in technology, medical supplies, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this is going to be a paradigm shifter over this next decade, and it's going to be debated. There's not going to be a clear-cut answer. There's a place, for large, optimal type of businesses, but there's also a place for diversification, local, et cetera, et cetera. The second thing is we found out that having cash and liquidity is very important. Of course, I go around the country and stress that, whether it's in the farm budget or the household budget, is to hold a little bit of cash and liquidity, and it's really taught us a lesson there. Now, fortunately, we had the stimulus checks, but I kind of make those analogous to a sugar high. And what's going to happen after the stimulus? What have we had, Eric? 42 million folks, on the unemployment roll. Well, there's going to be 10 or 12 million that, they may not get their jobs back, but if they get their jobs back, it may be of lesser salary. And so this one really taught us a whole lot about the resiliency and diversification, but also having your financial ducks in a row.
It sounds like, though, that you're convinced that the impetus is now there to see these kind of shifts back to a more diversified industry.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you're starting to see some of that come about. Of course, Pilgrim's Pride last week, the executives, of course, are now into some issues and challenges, and we're starting to see some people raise their eyebrows concerning the concentration of processing out there. And the other element is we may see deglobalization back to regionalization, particularly for critical industries. And here's one of the things I see worldwide. There is going to be what I call China bashing, and you're already picking that up, not only here in the United States, but Europe, Canada. You see what's happening in Australia. It's what happened to the beef industry there. They got crosswires with China, and China slapped some tariffs on. So I would have to say we're moving into an environment that we will have extreme volatility in prices and costs, and this is where having a good marketing and risk management program is going to be very, very critical.
And those are the kinds of things you'll talk about in the webinar, which we would like to address in just a moment. Need to take a quick break here in just a second. I wanted to ask you this, though, on the side of food and fiber consumption, the marketplace, if you will. Has COVID-19 instigated long-term changes in those consumption patterns?
Absolutely. And where we had this concentration in processing, this is going to be very candid, and probably some people aren't going to like this. When we had the shutdown of our processing plant, of course, the loser was our farmer and rancher, and the loser was the consumer, but the winner was our, big processors. And who the other winner was? Some of the what we call alternative products like plant-based products, et cetera. What they did, they dropped their price to be able to gain market share in this type of environment. And I think some folks need to look at themselves in the mirror. That's all I'm going to say, and I'm a little bit passionate about that, but I just kind of tell it like it is. So that's a couple of possible changes that we've seen out of here. And the whole aspect of knowing where your food came from and how it was processed, et cetera, is going to be very important. And I think another positive aspect is I think our urban public that was kind of getting away from farming and ranching can really appreciate the importance of, good food, fiber, and fuel source.
We're speaking with Dave Kohl, who is a professor emeritus agricultural economics at Virginia Tech University, and he will be the featured presenter at a webinar to be hosted this coming Wednesday evening by the Women Managing the Farm program here at Kansas State University. We'll have more on that and more on the message that he is planning to convey at that webinar after we break away for a few moments. This is Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, amber alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Agriculture Today is back now with an individual who'll be talking about the agricultural economy's recovery post-COVID-19. Dave Kohl is his name. He is a professor emeritus of agriculture and applied economics at Virginia Tech University, and he'll be featured in this webinar presentation to take place next Wednesday evening, June the 17th, and we'll have more about that and how you can be part of that free webinar. You've entitled this presentation, though, Dave, Transforming the Black Swan, referring to the COVID-19 incident, into a phoenix. You might explain how you intend to tie that theme into the agricultural economy, the agricultural industry broadly, as far as it rising like a phoenix, and what would be the pillars of that recovery.
Okay. It's real interesting. If you look at this black swan, some people will argue it's not a black swan. It was a predictable event. But I'll just stay with black swan. It's gone through three stages. First of all, it was the dirty bird, kind of dumped on us. And then the second, it's going through the angry bird stage now as, we unveil recovery plans, et cetera, et cetera. But I think every business and every industry has to start thinking about the phoenix. In other words, how we kind of rise from the ashes. I think any business of the future has four pillars. And the four pillars is, number one, being resilient. And how do you be resilient? You know your cost of production. You have a marketing and risk management program that you execute. And then you know your capital position, your equity position, and, your borrowing position. Resiliency is going to be one of the pillars. Second pillar is going to be being agile. That's having this thing called working capital. It's having access to cash so that it's used as a blocking strategy, but also an offensive strategy. I think being agile is, do you have a market for your product? and we discussed that in the first part of this program. And I think that's going to be very, very critical in the future. And then I think something that's going to be real critical is, I discussed it earlier, optimization and efficiency versus diversification and resiliency. And, what is the best combination for each and every one of your businesses? So that's your second pillar. Your third pillar is you're going to have to be entrepreneurial and innovative. Agriculture is a people-first business, and the investment people aligning with the new marketplace changes. And I think one of the things about being entrepreneurial and innovative is we're kind of into quarterly sprints, but having those quarterly sprints and monitoring them sets us up for the journey of sustainability in the long run. Your final pillar is having a strong business IQ. It's real interesting you mentioned 1980s. 1980s took out the average and the below average production manager. Well, one of the things that we will see here is having that strong business IQ, all the way from knowing your cost of production to having your goals and doing a cash flow and having a written plan for improvement. And then kind of the four mini pillars within that pillar is being able to plan, strategize, execute, monitor. These are all things that I'm going to be discussing on the webcast more in depth and actually have a business IQ chart that people will have access to be able to fill out. But that's what's going to be very, very critical for success.
As you consider those pillars, consider where we've been, where we are, where we might be going in agriculture. What segment of this industry is likely to recover the quickest from COVID-19's impact?
Yeah, and the quickest and the slowest. And it's really interesting, Eric. I get asked this question. I don't think it's going to be the segment of the industry or a specific segment, the protein sector or the crop sector or the value-added sector. I think it's going to be the businesses within the sector. In other words, the businesses that, operate off these four pillars and the businesses that take time to bring the best talent, whether it's family members or new members on. I think what you will see is there's going to be success in every industry out there, whether it's protein, whether it's grain, whether it's a value-added type of sector. And, one of the things, Eric, is that everyone's asking me, well, what's going to be the next big thing? Well, I'm just going to tell you, there's no such thing as the next big thing. I think it comes from within, that focus, being able to kind of drown out all the, noise that's going on and being able to focus. That is going to determine the recovery, the quickest and the slowest. And again, I'm already seeing businesses and individuals already kind of into the Phoenix stage. But I've got some other folks that, are kind of lagging behind. So to answer it, it's not about the specific industry segments. It's the people or the businesses within the segment.
Reading between the lines a bit here, it sounds as if you believe there are prosperous times yet for agriculture in the not-too-distant future.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I've got to throw this one out. I'm a veteran of the 1980s, and, I was probably too young to realize it, but I was an optimist that you got to kind of see that cup half full, or take a lemon and turn it to lemonade. And you know what that requires? A good attitude. Sometimes you got to look from within. And I got to tell you another thing too, Eric. I think it's the people that you're surrounded with can help you and assist. And do I come out rah-rah every day? No. But occasionally I'll touch base, connect with folks that, if I'm having kind of a down day, kind of picks me up.
So once again, what individual producers, local agribusinesses can do to hasten along the recovery in their situations, it gets back to those four pillars. Anything else additionally to that?
No, one of the things that I think it's going to be very important, whether it's agribusiness or ag lending, a lot of people ask me about the ag lending sector. Ag lending sector is not going to see the problems in 2020. The issues will come in 21, 22. after some of our government programs kind of come up. And that's why I'm telling producers, prepare yourself for 2021, 2022. And I'm also, when I speak to ag lenders, but I'm also, whether it's the agribusiness sector, whether it's the ag lending sector, I think this is a great, great opportunity to increase our financial literacy, business risk management literacy. Education is going to be very, very important. And it was real interesting. I had an agri-lender said the other day, well, wonder if I have a person with a low business IQ, but they just don't have the attitude to, increase that business IQ. And I said, well, that's going to be the divide out, whether, they're possibly going to make it or they're not. You know what kind of concerns me there is if they've got a younger family member that's following that line, that's not going to be working in, over the next 5 to 10 years. And so I think education is going to be extremely, extremely important. And Eric, it's going to be interesting, whether it's K-State or Virginia Tech, we are definitely going to see some paradigm shifts on how we deliver education out here in the future. And again, I think it gives us an opportunity to reinvent ourselves.
And along that very line then, in conclusion here, more about this webinar. Once more, it's coming up this coming Wednesday evening starting at 7 o'clock. That's June the 17th on the calendar, just to be certain here. What, Dave, do you hope will occur during this exchange?
I hope three things. Number one, I hope I can give them a perspective from a 30,000-foot view, what's going on globally and how this thing is progressing out. Hopefully I can give them 3 or 4 actionable items that they could take back to their business, to their personal, or to their family lives, because I think it requires balance. And a positive out of this whole deal, Mother Nature hit us right in the old tummy here, and it's she basically said, hey, slow down, And then the third outcome is hopefully we'll get some questions in where I can have, some dialogue with the participants. And I hope, regardless of age or size of business and everything, I'm going to try to be able to give something that can be a take-home. I probably will challenge some thinking out there. It's just an honor to be on the program. I'll probably be in the hayfield all day coming in doing the webcast at night because we have the farm business as well.
This is shaping up to be an excellent program. It is a free webinar for anybody who would like to take part. Dave, looking very much forward to what you have to share at that webinar and the give and take that will ensue. Thank you for passing along these thoughts with us today.
And thank you so much for the opportunity to do the interview, and you keep up the good work.
Very kind. Thank you. He is Dr. David Kohl, Professor Emeritus of Agricultural and Applied Economics at Virginia Tech University. He will be the featured presenter at this webinar to be hosted by the Women Managing the Farm program here at Kansas State, Wednesday evening, June the 17th at 7 o'clock. It is free, no cost to be part of it, but you do need to register in advance. To do so, go to womenmanagingthefarm.com. That's womenmanagingthefarm.com, or call this number, 785-293-2100. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
Agriculture Today continues here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you. And with today's agricultural news headlines now, these courtesy in part of DTN. Tyson Foods, the leading U.S. chicken producer, says it is cooperating in a Justice Department price-fixing investigation under a leniency program that will allow the company to avoid criminal prosecution in exchange for aiding in the continuing probe of other poultry suppliers. After receiving a grand jury subpoena back in April of last year, Tyson discovered that some of its employees were implicated in the alleged scheme. The company said it approached the Justice Department disclosing its own actions and seeking leniency. A Justice Department spokesperson declined to comment on this. Tyson acknowledged its role in the investigation coming a week after 4 chicken industry executives, including employees of Pilgrim's Pride and Claxton Poultry Farms, were indicted on charges of price fixing and bid rigging. Now, the Justice Department is alleging that the chicken company executives and employees for years had exchanged details of their own pricing and that of competitors via phone calls and text messages at the same time they were negotiating supply deals with restaurants. The defendants include Pilgrim's Pride Chief Executive Jason Penn. All have pleaded not guilty, and a jury trial is scheduled to begin in August. Now, how the Justice Department antitrust leniency program works, the first company to self-report its participation in a price-fixing conspiracy can avoid criminal convictions, fines, and prison time for its cooperating employees. A cooperating company can also secure limits on monetary damages it might have to pay in private civil litigation covering the same conduct. The company must admit to a criminal violation of antitrust laws, terminate the offending conduct, take remedial action, and cooperate fully with the Justice Department. Revisit of burdensome regulations on small meat processors is being called for by Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee, with the lawmakers urging USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue to make several changes as the, quote, high cost of complying with the meat processing laws has made it hard for smaller processors to compete and has led to significant consolidation in the industry, as that request reads. Citing the reduced operating capacity at meat plants amid the COVID pandemic, the lawmakers noted that it has left ranchers and other livestock producers with few alternatives for getting their meat processed. The letter urges the USDA to consider giving small meat processors flexibility on complying with hazard analysis and critical control point plans, or HACCP plans, also streamlining the approval process for labels and increasing flexibility and lessen expenses on smaller processors for inspectors needed beyond normal hours. The letter says taking these actions in these and other areas will lower barriers to entry and expansion that smaller meat processors face. USDA analysts are about to issue new supply and demand projections for the unsettled livestock and meat sector. Within the hour, the USDA's Gary Crawford looks ahead.
This new round of USDA reports and forecasts will not only project supplies and prices for crops, but also for the livestock and meat sector. USDA's Outlook Board Chairman Mark Jekanowski says it's been and is going to be incredibly difficult for his analysts to make those forecasts given unprecedented and ever-changing situations involving
plant closures, plant reopenings, slowdown, slaughter industry bottlenecks, and recently record high wholesale meat prices.
And, of course, on the positive side of those,
the meat supply and demand situation is trying to come back into balance.
Mark says over the last 3 months it's been very hard to know what's happening in the present tense, let alone trying to forecast what's ahead for meat supplies and livestock prices.
And June won't be any different. It'll presumably take months before things come back into kind of a normal balance for the livestock sector.
USDA's new forecasts for that sector will be out noon Eastern Time. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And, of course, on Monday's cattle market segment here on Agriculture Today, we'll take a closer look at what those numbers tell us, with K-State's Glenn Tonser featured during that segment. Well, we're on now to our regular Thursday feature, the Kansas Soybean Update. And standing by with that, as always, is Gregg Eyestone. Greg?
Earl Lewis, director of the Kansas Water Office, joins us. And Earl, as the weather starts to warm up, it also means the harmful algae bloom season picks up as well. And the Kansas Water Office has ongoing projects such as the Milford Lake HAB runoff project to help combat a problem that can cause a lot of issues.
As you mentioned, we've already started to see a few of the lakes that are starting to develop algae blooms as we've seen in the past. And the food source for that algae is primarily phosphorus. The way to combat that long term is to try and reduce the amount of phosphorus that's coming into our water bodies. And one project we have going on is the Milford Lake RCPP, which is a cooperative program with NRCS. That RCPP stands for Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and it brings in additional federal dollars into that area above Milford Lake to try and put in practices that reduce that phosphorus getting into our water supply so that long term we have a better situation than we do today. This project is a little bit unique, and the Soybean Commission is one of 30 partners both above and below the reservoir that are working together to try and provide funding and in-kind resources to address this issue. And so that means our agricultural groups, some of our recreational groups, and even some of our public water suppliers like Manhattan, Topeka, Lawrence, and even clear down into Johnson County are providing funds and in-kind services to help this project be successful.
Runoff and sediment are two big things that could be the cause of that as well. And that's where you need everyone's help in this, specifically from those in agriculture and, like you said, with the partnership, but those farmers and ranchers too.
You know, when we think about phosphorus, it really does stick with that sediment for the most part. As we always like to say, it's better to keep that. If you're paying for that phosphorus, it's better to keep it on your property and out of the stream in the first place. So that's really what we want to do, is help producers manage that nutrient better through nutrient management, through cover crops or some other best management practice, so that fertilizer stays really where they want it to stay, which is on the field or in the pasture and not in the stream.
For a project like this is really a long-term type of a deal that is really just getting started.
What we're trying to do is make a difference in the long term. The buildup of nutrients in our reservoirs has been happening over many years and in some cases many decades. And so our solution or the change to that's going to happen over a number of years. But the good thing I think we've seen is that we get about $3 million of additional funds through NRCS from this project, and almost half of that was picking up in the first year. That this last year was really the first full year of implementation of this project. And so that shows a lot of producer interest and benefit from this project.
That's Earl Lewis, director of the Kansas Water Office, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Gregg Eyestone there. Many thanks, Greg. Have you taken advantage of our podcast service yet for listening to this broadcast anytime, including that automatic download option? It's as easy as going to agtoday.net. The instructions will lead you from there. agtoday.net. This is Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so stay a minimum of 6 feet away from others and stay home if you can. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This week's horticulture segment now comes your way on Agriculture Today, and across the way is Gregg Eyestone. He's the Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent, and we'll go through a grab bag of things, to put it that way, concerning our vegetable gardening, some timely matters that you gardeners need to have in mind. But what we want to start with is the end, if you will, Greg, of two of our earlier planted crops. We're nearing time, if not already there, for harvesting both potatoes and those onions. And what's the time frame on that generally?
Yeah, so potatoes, we'll start with those. You usually grow them for those new potatoes, the different flavors and textures you get from growing them yourselves. If you let them to go ahead and grow longer and get more mature, they're going to be more like the store-bought potatoes, and that's an option as well. But right now, the new potatoes can be harvested, whether you've made your mound up around those stems. You can reach in there with your hand and pluck a couple if you want to, or if you want to just dig up the whole kit and caboodle, you can. I do use a potato fork, so hopefully not nicking as many potatoes that way. Key there is the skin is going to be very tender, and so you want to let that skin cure a little bit anyway before you maybe plop it in your bucket and take it into the house. That skin is what makes these new potatoes taste so great. Those thin skins are different than you find in the store. And so if you're going to use them right away, go ahead and try and knock off as much dirt, but those skins will get bruised probably no matter what. So you want to use those right away. If you're going to try and cure them for a while, you want to leave them out in the garden for a couple hours, let them dry. You're still going to have to bring them into the shed or the garage and let those cure a little bit longer so those skins really start to toughen up so that when you do put them into some kind of storage, you're not nicking them as much where you'll cause probably some rots to develop. So it does take some effort to make sure that you get your produce the way you want it and get to use it at home versus it going ahead and being damaged and rot away.
Now, if one is growing to baking potato size, different signals as far as when to dig those?
Yeah, you probably need to wait till your vines are starting to decline, turn yellow and dry and brown up, and that may be into July. It just depends on temperatures. So you may still have some time to get some more growth if you're wanting to get the really big potato and get the maximum production. Again, those are going to become more of the store-bought type, and whether that's what you want to get from your homegrown potatoes or not, it's up to you.
If you're going that route, managing those potatoes from here forward, anything out of the ordinary? Water, obviously, but beyond that?
Water if we need to. If you can't get to them, they start to rot in your garden. So you want to make sure you have time to harvest those and not let them go completely brown, dried up, and then have a rain, and then, it's 100 degrees out. And if you ever dug a rotted potato, you know what that smells like, and
not good.
Want to prefer not to do that again. And so you may want to just plan ahead and make sure you get those potatoes out before we get to that situation.
What about those onions and the signals for pulling those? Again, it gets back to what that foliage is doing in essence, doesn't it?
It is. And you can harvest an onion really at any time to use it. But once about half of the necks of those onions start to flop over naturally, that means they're pretty much done as far as getting any bigger. And at that point, we're back to trying to get them to harvest to store, and we need those to kind of really dry down so they don't rot as well. So once you have about half of your necks of your leaves of your onions fallen over, you want to maybe go out there and knock the rest of them off down so that they can start that process. At any point in there, you can go ahead and lift those out of the garden and move them to a dry, airy location so those can dry down. And that may take some extra effort because the last few years I've harvested mine, put them on my porch, hoping they would dry down, and a month later they're still on the porch and still not getting that neck to be really dry where I can cut the leaves off and cut the roots off and store it. So it depends on humidity during that time frame, but hopefully you can get those dried down as best you can so you can store them. Because typically people grow more onions than they consume right away anyway. And so you get those dried down, stored in a cool and dry environment so that you can keep them and use them through the fall and maybe winter.
Making sure that those onions get decent air circulation will help in that cause somehow.
Yeah, definitely air circulation. And if we can have lower humidity, that's what we need for our onions to cure up.
All right. Well, let's talk about managing those crops that'll be with us yet for a while. Hopefully the sweet corn got off and running in a good shape. What would one want to think about in as far as mid-season fertilization for that crop?
Yeah, so we know grasses love nitrogen, utilize nitrogen very well. And so nitrogen is what we're concerned about. Typically, if you get your corn up 8, 10, maybe 12 inches, you might give them some extra nitrogen. That, again, depends on your soil practices. If you've manured or put on some compost or things like that before you planted, you may not need to add as much nitrogen or any at all at that point. But that's going to give you a nice, big, sturdy plant to produce food energy to go into that ear as it develops. You may also want to put a little bit of nitrogen on at tassel. That also helps fill those ears out to make sure it has enough energy going into that ear to be as full and as great as you want it to. So you can add nitrogen a couple times during the growing period of our sweet corn, but again, if you've already put on compost or manure, then you may not need to add as much nitrogen during the rest of the growing time.
Because if things push forward, adequate heat and ample moisture when needed, why, we would be looking at picking corn here in just a few weeks. So hopefully that one fertilization will push it on. And by the way, for not only corn but all vegetable crops, you Strongly encourage producers get a hold, Greg, of that Kansas Garden Guide from K-State, and it point by point walks one through the management steps for each and every primary vegetable.
That's right. It's a great resource, and we often look at it before we get planting to find out maybe some varieties. When do we plant? How far apart do we plant? But we might ignore it during the actual growing phases, and so would suggest you pick that book up and review it during these growing points so that you're as successful as possible. There'll also be the harvest techniques in there and maybe a little bit on storage as well. So great reference to look at during the growing season, not just at the beginning of the season.
Check it out through the horticulture website at K-State. Also ask through your local extension office, of course. As always, Greg, thanks for the time and the input.
It's been my pleasure. Happy gardening.
Gregg Eyestone is the Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent with us on this week's Horticulture segment, bringing this Thursday edition to a close. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.